Welcome back to Making Money Matter, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Kerry Stevenson, and today I've asked Adam Kiley. He's the CEO of Frontier Energy. ASX code is FHE. Now, they are building a scalable renewable energy hub over in WA. And before you sit there and say another energy project, first of all, things I like about this one, it's simple, but I'm not going to take everything away from Adam, but it's simple, but it's also very different. They're very different over there in the West in WA. So we're going to find out a bit about that. And Adam also understands the fundamentals of energy. One thing I want to point out before we get started is have a look at what we're all doing now. We've got electric cars, we're buying new phones, we've got new computers. I'm talking to Adam over Zoom. I've got a light over the amount of electricity is not reducing, it's increasing. How are we going to do that? Well, Frontier Energy seemed like they have got not a simplistic way of doing this, but they've seen the need, they've seen the demand opportunity, and they're getting on with the job. So, Adam, good to see you.
Thanks very much for having us today, Kerry.
Let's, before we get started into a sort of a deeper dive, first time on Making Money Matter, who are you? Why are you doing what you're doing?
Yes, again, Adam Kiley, CEO of the company. I've been working in the resources and energy industry for the last 20 years or so, across a different range of roles, but predominantly over the last number of years, it's been on the financial side of things. So that's in equity markets, debt finance, and in corporate development roles as well. Frontier Energy overall. So as you've already alluded to, we're a renewable energy development company, and we've just released our first DFS on the stage one of the project. So that's the Waroona Renewable Energy Project. So the project is located about 120 kilometres south of Perth, in Western Australia, as you mentioned. We're also 60 kilometres away from Collie. Now, I'll go through why that is important in a little bit more detail. But high level, that just ensures that we have all the infrastructure around where we are for the stage one project. The biggest aspect of that is we have not just one, we actually have two grid connections onto the West Australian Power Network, which are effectively ready to go. And we'll be looking to connect up to that really quite soon. The other important aspect of that, because we're on that main transition line between Collie and Perth, and for those that don't know, Collie forever and a day has been the major energy source in Western Australia, or on the southwest interconnection system. That's been coal energy or coal power production. That's closing down in 2029. That is the largest line on the grid. There's a lot of capacity on that line. So effectively, we will be unconstrained going onto that large line.
So you go onto the line that is currently being used to transmit energy from a coal source, and you're going to be a renewable source. In simplistic terms, is that right?
Yeah, very high level. So there's a lot, obviously, across Australia at the moment. There's a lot going on with the transition from carbon emission fuel sources towards renewable energy. Yeah. I may as well start getting into that into a little bit more detail now.
Yeah, and actually, before
you through the project and a little bit more.
Okay, I just want to stop you there because I want to ask you two questions before we get, because you are very knowledgeable about energy, and I think it's important for people to understand. But you mentioned just before that you've got two lines, two connections on the grid.
Yes.
How is that easy to get? How many connections are there? How important is that for Frontier Energy?
Yeah, so it's extremely important to have those connections onto the grid. In essence, if you don't have a connection onto the grid, you've effectively got an old farm. That's all you have. The grid in Western Australia, as with grids around the world at the moment, there's a big transition going through. So grids originally were built for carbon emission fuel sources, whether that be gas or coal. Renewable energy typically needs a lot of land. So whether it's solar or whether it's wind. If you think of it very simplistically, where those areas are is where there's no population. If there's no population there, there's usually no infrastructure around that at the moment. So what governments are having to do is build infrastructure out to those areas to expand the grid. That's not an easy or cheap solution. That takes a long time to actually happen. Governments then are obviously wanting private enterprise to chip in and pay for that along the way. But even if we just said in Western Australia, for example, tomorrow morning we wake up and the government says, yes, we're going to expand the grid in Western Australia to the north. It's going to take the best part of 5 years to actually build that grid out. Then you need an energy supplier coming through, who's going to come through to permits, approvals, environmentals, First Nations to get that project ready to go. There's probably another 5 years on top of that again. So you're probably talking, if we went best case today in a new area to expand a grid out, we're probably talking the best part of a decade to actually get it there. With the project that we have, this isn't something we woke up about yesterday and said, let's build a renewable energy project. This project actually commenced work on in 2018. We've got all permits, approvals, licenses, environmentals, all of that has been done over the last 5 years to get to this point. The DFS, as we'll step through in a bit more detail later on, that's done. The numbers that we had were exceptional, and it really highlights the project that we have, which is in essence ready to go. And we're hitting the market, I believe, at the perfect time. It's not just the perfect time for the company to, I suppose, best make profit from this project, but it's a perfect time for the state as well. The state's going through a huge energy transition at the moment. And as I mentioned, the grid, it's going to be difficult for more renewable energy to enter in the timely manner that the governments are actually wanting. We're in a very unique situation. We own all the land in an area where it was basically poor farming ground. We got the two connections on the grid. Why did the grid actually have this terminal built where it was? As I mentioned, Collie is 50 kilometres south of where we are. Perth is 100 kilometres north of where we are. 2 kilometres to the east of where we are is our Coles Wagerup refinery. That is the largest energy consumer in the state. So they built this terminal in essence for that. What we did, or what the previous owners of the project did, they went through, they identified this opportunity in about 2018, 2019. They started the work on it. They went through the permits, approvals, all the processes, environmental, whatnot, got those connections on the grid. So we have the one connection which is completely ready to go now. The second connection, we're working through that at the moment. That will be approved at the beginning of next year. Those connections are the things which are as rare as hen's teeth, especially in the part of the grid which is effectively unconstrained as well. And when I say unconstrained, what I mean by that is we're in a 330 kV line. So
what does that mean?
Yeah, but basically that means that with the energy that we're going to put onto the grid, we're not going to be curtailed. So let me take a step back. If we were on a smaller line, say 110 kV line, there's a line which goes north of Perth, that's 110 kV line. If there's too much wind, because that's fantastic wind country, great solar country, if there's too much energy going on that line, the producers will be told you have to turn off. We can't take all that energy to come back down. With where we're at on that line, we're effectively unconstrained. So it's a huge advantage that we have to get energy onto the grid when it's actually most in demand.
And is all that energy going onto the grid, is that coming from solar?
Yeah, so we've got our strategy is for stage one. It's going to be a 120 megawatt solar facility, but we're also going to have an 80 megawatt battery as part of that as well. So if you want to think of it really simplistically, the sun begins shining 6 a.m. in the morning.
Yep.
During that first initial period, we will sell solar into the grid. Okay, so from 6 o'clock in the morning to 9 o'clock, we'll sell solar into the grid. Because energy demand starts increasing at that time. By the time you get to about 9 o'clock on average, PV solar or household solar, and Western Australia has one of the highest household solars in the world. It's 38% of households in WA have it. You find that energy prices starts dipping during that point of the day because there's a lot of energy coming on. What we're going to do at that point is we'll start charging our battery. Okay, so if we think of it very simplistically, we will charge our battery then for the next 4 to 5 hours during that high energy increase as prices dip. We then store the energy in our battery. Okay, at about 2 o'clock, if you think of it again, energy prices start increasing. Why do they start increasing? Kids are coming home from school, aircon starts turning up again as you get the afternoon sun comes through. Or in wintertime, you have the heating coming on, and energy prices start increasing again. And that's at the same time as energy supply starts diminishing because PV solar starts coming off.
Right.
At 5 o'clock, we now turn the battery on. Everybody's home, energy demand starts increasing. The issue with renewables, as we know, the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. The solution is battery, or part of the solution is definitely batteries. I'd say simplistically at 5 o'clock at night, we turn the battery on. We sell that energy now into what is known as the peak energy period of the day, which is 5 in the afternoon to 9 o'clock at night. Importantly, with the battery selection that we have, it's something called a DC coupled battery, and it basically means that it goes directly from solar straight into the battery. The importance of that is we're not losing any energy from that transition along the way. The other important aspect, because we're supplying our own energy on the way through, we don't have to pay any additional service charges, no losses, as I mentioned already as well. So all we're doing is effectively a time shift to sell at a much higher price when energy demands are actually increasing during the day.
All right, so you've got the connections. Talk to us about, and I want to go into the DFS in a minute, but before we do, just again, keeping it simple, when does this start up? I'm looking at it from an investor point of view going, okay, when's the revenue going to start? How far down the track are you? You've done the DFS,
Yeah.
I get that, but...
Yeah, so the DFS has been complete. It's the first time we've released the numbers, and we'll step through that in a little bit more detail shortly. We're actually moving extremely quickly from this process here. So the debt finance process, that's already commenced.
Okay.
We've got, at the minute, we've got 20 NDAs signed with various banks. That's local banks and international banks. The target will be to have, I think, about 30 is what our advisors guessing at the moment. From that process, then IMs are going to be sent out shortly, as well as data room access. We're expecting early in the second quarter, we will shortlist a number of those banks and we'll receive indicative bids. From that process thereon, we'll look to finalise the debt finance process. So we're targeting FID by about the middle of this year.
Oh, wow, that's quick.
No, it's extremely quick. Again, the difference with renewable energy, nothing that we're doing has not been seen before. And it's the importance of that is it even goes down to the solar panel selection that we'll have. We'll choose solar panels which are being used in Western Australia on this grid already. The battery selection, so we went out to tender to a number of parties. We only went out to batteries or battery manufacturers that are building large-scale batteries on the grid in Western Australia at the moment. The whole idea behind that is you want to keep it simple. You want to keep it vanilla. The second you introduce something which is somewhat exotic or something different to what the regulator's not seen before, you're asking for delays. We don't want any delays. We want to ensure that everything we've done, they've seen before, they understand it, and it's just going to make the whole process much quicker thereafterwards. So let's just say by the middle of this year, we have funding in place, which is a target for the company. It's then a 2-year construction time thereafterwards. But when I say a 2-year construction time, the time actually on site, it's only about a 3 to 4 month process. It's actually ordering those long lead items, which takes quite a bit of time to actually get them on the way through. So, for example, if we order solar panels, I think it's about a 12-month long lead time at the moment.
Wow.
So that's the lag on the way through. You also need to ensure that the regulator, which is not the regulator, Western Power, which does the final connection, their timing is about 2 years as well. So there's no point expediting anything too quick. It's just the process that it actually takes to get energy onto the grid. So we build it, say, in 2 years' time from now. We then allowed about a 4-month process there afterwards to go through the checks with AMO as Western Power to ensure that the energy can go on. It's been tested. That's standard wherever you are in the country. So we're targeting first energy by the end of 26. Once that's up and going, then you've got a 30-year operation there afterwards.
That leads me nicely into stage 1 of the DFS, because it's the numbers were good. I think you're pretty happy about it. Give us the overview, and then we'll do a bit more of a deeper dive.
Yeah, so we were really impressed with the numbers overall. So first off, I should say with the number of assumptions that we assumed on the revenue side of things, we received independent financial advice on that. So it was a group called Aurora Financial. The reason why we got independent is independent numbers obviously carry a lot more weight in the market. And obviously we're going through the debt financing process at the moment as well. Debt finance years, they want independent forecasts. So in our opinion, we believe it's somewhat conservative. We think there is upside on it. However, on saying that, we've still got an average of $68 million EBITDA over the first 5 years and $63 million EBITDA over the first 10 years. So they're extremely strong revenue numbers for this stage 1 project. That comes through for a payback after tax of 5.7 or pre-tax, I think it's about 4.5 years on the way through. Total capital cost is $304 million. And as I already mentioned, we're going through a debt financing process. The debt process, we're looking to conclude that shortly. And typically with renewable energy projects, you can leverage up at a higher level compared to what you would, say, a mining project. a key reason why banks do like these kinds of projects, renewable energy projects, is in essence, once they're switched on, they very rarely actually turn off. The key point on that is you look at our operating costs. So our operating costs are about $5 million per annum at a project basis, okay? If you break that down on a per kilowatt basis, just to make it quite simplistic, that comes through at about 2.4 cents per kilowatt, okay? When you have a look at the revenue forecast that we have, that's 30 cents per kilowatt. So you've got a huge margin on the way through there. So even if you said energy prices half moving into the future, we still got a huge margin that we're still going to be making money on the way through. And that's what banks want. They want the guarantee that once you turn on, you're going to be able to repay that debt. Terms for debt finance, and I don't want to jump into it too far yet, because let's see how the terms come through. But generally, they're exceptionally long for renewable energy projects. You'll be looking sort of life of operation debt terms will be around the 20-year mark.
Adam, it does sound fairly simplistic. You said it's got a 30-year life. Is anyone else doing something similar over there in WA to what you're doing, or have you got the first mover advantage in a way?
Listen, there's a lot of energy, new energy projects which are going on, not just in Western Australia, but across Australia at the moment. In Western Australia at the moment, there's a lot of focus on batteries. So there's a lot of large scale batteries which are being developed. There's about 1 gigawatt of batteries which are forecasted to come on over the next couple of years. The idea with those batteries, they're going to capture that excess PV daytime solar. There's also a number of smaller solar projects, as well as a couple of wind projects which are coming through. So there is energy coming through, but the issue is overall, we believe, it's not the new energy coming through, it's the increase in demand in energy. So there's obviously there's the two sides to the coin with the energy transition which is happening at the moment. The one side, renewables, they're moving on their way through. In Western Australia at the moment, we have 35% renewable energy generation. That's in line, that's exactly the same as what it is on a national scale. 35% of energy comes from renewables. The target for the nation is 82% by 2030. So in the next 7 years, we have to increase significantly along the way. At the same time as we're going through, so we're increasing the amount of renewables that are coming on, we're also taking energy off the grid. So in Western Australia, as I mentioned already, Collie, so the state-owned coal, that provides about 25 to 30% of energy on the grid today. The government's already announced that by 2029, that's coming off. So that's 25 to 30% of energy which will come off. There is a private operation as well, Blue Waters, which is owned by Sumitomo. That's widely reported in the media across here that it does lose money on a regular occurrence. That's the only other operation at the moment, and that's forecasted to come off in 2031. So we've got 25 to 30% of energy which is coming off over the next 7 years. And then we have this large increase in renewables, which is required. At the same time, as you mentioned at the outset, there's a huge increase in demand, which is coming through. So AEMO, which is the regulator across Australia, they've got a report which comes out every year. It's called the ESO report. They forecasted in their most recent one that on their base case, demand in Western Australia is going to increase by 80% over the next decade. On their upside case, it's 220% increase in demand. So there's a huge increase in demand, which is coming through at the same time. It was actually interesting. So in Western Australia, it shouldn't be a surprise. We, in February, it's always hot here in February.
It's hot everywhere, Adam.
Yeah, but it was very hot this year. But that to one side, which might surprise people, the 6 highest demand peak periods ever on the Swiss happened in February this year. So in 1 month, that record was exceeded 6 times. On the final record, so it happened at 5:55 on a Sunday afternoon, 90% of the energy that was being supplied was from carbon emission sources. So that was from coal and gas.
Yep.
When you're seeing we're targeting in just 7 years, 82% renewables, there is a huge energy transition that has to happen very quickly.
Hang on a second. Why does it have to happen? Because if you can't meet that, do you see what I mean? I'm looking at these numbers sometimes, 82%, and I think that's very ambitious. It may not happen.
It may not happen. That may fall short. But the reality is the government is they're trying to incentivize new industry to come through. So from a federal government point of view, the government announced at the back end of last year the capacity investment scheme. They're still yet to administer that. The idea is at the moment the first round of auctions for that will start in April of this year. That's a $67 billion program. So the government is really pushing very, very hard to get this transition underway. Gas, in my opinion, will be part of this transition on the way through. Coal is coming off. There is no doubt in my mind. Coal is coming off in this state 100%. In other states, I think you see it across on the East Coast already. Coal is already coming off at a much quicker rate at the moment. But the energy transition, whether people believe in it or don't believe in it, it is definitely happening.
All right. So you mentioned government. Is your project of state significance if they're so keen to get this into the renewable? Are they looking at you? They're giving you grants? Are they fast tracking you? What's happening? How are they getting involved?
Yeah, to be honest, as the stage one project, it's an important project. Is it of state significance? Well, it's a pretty significant project in terms of 120 megawatts for stage one. When we actually grow the project up from what we've already got, so from the land that we have available with the project, back of the envelope, that's got capacity of about 400 megawatts of solar energy. Anything we do at the moment, based on, we'll always work it through on an economic basis, we'll do solar and battery at the same time.
Okay.
A 400 megawatt solar project today would be the largest solar project in Australia. If we have a battery as part of that project as well, just that's a 300 megawatt DC coupled battery you have at the same time. We've got a lot of energy potential to now come into those peak energy periods. So whilst it may not seem of state significance today, very, very quickly, it may not just be state significance, this would be a major project on a national scale as well. And then with the capacity that we have, with the two grid connections, we'll look to grow it much further past that 400 into the future as well.
I'd like to go back to numbers. I'm a numbers girl. You say that the forecast average revenue is about 74 million over the first 5 years. That seems pretty good. Talk us through where that's coming from.
Okay, so with the revenue, that we've got a few different revenue lines which are coming through. So the first one is the reserve capacity payment. So the reserve capacity mechanism in Western Australia, it only exists in Western Australia. It doesn't exist on the East Coast. The reason why they have it in Western Australia is we have a cap on our energy prices here. So we're capped at $700 for energy prices. On the East Coast, the cap is $16,600. So when in Victoria...
Stop. 700 in WA. When you say a cap, sorry, I didn't quite understand that. You say 700 in WA, 16,000 on the East Coast. We are the same country last time I checked. What is...
Again, our grid is a little bit different. To be honest, when people have done studies on the way this works through, my understanding is it always comes through as a similar result at the back end. Okay. But the government here has decided, and this isn't a new initiative, this has been going on for forever and a day, to incentivize or to make energy generators whole. The reserve capacity payment, it's paid to energy providers so they are ready to supply energy onto the grid when it's required most. Okay. So for every megawatt of energy you have available, you're paid an amount. So if that's a firm energy amount, so they changed at the back end of last year. So the government again is moving away from carbon emission. Previously, the benchmark was a gas power station. At the back end of last year, they've now made that a 4-hour lithium-ion battery. Okay. That's a key reason why we've got a 4-hour lithium-ion battery as part of our study to ensure we're going to get 100% of this reserve capacity amount. So for every megawatt you have available, you're paid an amount. The forecast at the moment, when you have a deficit coming through as well, is $300,000 in our first year of production. So if you do 80 megawatts times by $300,000, that gives you $24 million. Okay. If you have intermittent energy such as solar, you're also paid an amount for reserve capacity, but it's at a discount. So we've assumed, I think it's 8% payment for that. So that adds another $2 to $3 million for reserve capacity payment for us overall. So it's about $27 million reserve capacity. We're estimated in year one. The other advantage of the reserve capacity payment, it's obviously backed by the government and AMO. We can lock that in for 5 years. Okay, locking that in for 5 years, that now, when we go for debt financing, that's very attractive for debt financiers. So we've now in essence, locked in, or if you wanted to think of it as a resource project, got a hedge on what a good part of our revenue coming through is going to be.
Okay.
We then have the next revenue streams are obviously energy sales. So that's direct energy sales into the grid. We've broken that down in terms of battery prices as well as then the solar. So as I mentioned at the outset, we will look to sell our battery at between 5 p.m. to 9 o'clock at night. Those peak energy prices, they average at about $140, $150 per megawatt over the last year. And that price has increased by about 70 to 80% over the last 2 years. And then on those shoulder periods, so as the sun starts getting up in the morning and setting in the afternoon, we'll sell energy during those periods as well. So when you have a look at the combination of those two, I think it's about 33 million that we get from energy sales on the way through. Again, I'll emphasize again, these aren't our forecasts. The forecast on energy prices, that was done by an independent group because we need to have those forecasts for debt providers going into the future.
Yep.
Next revenue line we get is LGC. So LGCs, to really simplify it down, that's like a carbon credit that we receive. So with the forecast that we're using for carbon or the LGC price, I think in year one of operation, we have it at about $40 to $50 per, or $45 to $40 per unit. We then have that diminishing down to around $20 per unit by 2030, and then falling away thereafterwards. The LGC price for the last 3 years has been forecasted to go down to a number of around $10 per unit, but it's still trading around that $50 to $60 per unit, and it's consistently traded around those levels. However, again, we'll go in line with what's being forecasted by our advisor. So we do have those prices falling away. The final payment that we have coming through, it's called FCAS, or it's like an essential services. You get that when you have a battery, because you can, in essence, you help balance the grid during those periods. So you're paid a small amount, but that's an insignificant amount overall in any case. So again, you look at that on the way through, it's about $75 million in revenue. Then you've got operating costs of about $5 million per annum thereafterwards. Again, renewable energy projects, there's not a lot of operating costs that are actually required once these things are up and going. So then you're coming through at a really strong margin of about $68 million per year.
All right. So right now, I think your market cap's about 115, 120 mils. So sounds like there's some, I want to understand, because we've run out of time, Adam, so I've got to wrap this up in a way. So if you could just let us know, why do you think right now is a good time for our beautiful community out there to be sitting up and taking notice of, give me 3 reasons why they should be sitting up and taking notice right now of what you're doing. DFS is out.
DFS is out. I think typically when a DFS comes out, there's been a lot of news leading up to that where people get an understanding of the numbers. We've effectively gone to a DFS. So we've done work on solar in the background in the past to understand what those capital numbers are. This is the first time we've released what the revenue numbers on this actually are. So it's the first time the market's been able to see what this actually is. There really is a lack of renewable energy projects on the ASX as well. So there's not a lot of opportunities for investors to invest in this sector. In Western Australia, we're the only play listed on the ASX which has a renewable energy asset in this market. Okay, so we're the only opportunity for investors to invest in the world's largest microgrid on an area where energy prices are forecasted to keep going up into the future. In my opinion, if you look at the commodity space at the moment, it's tough out there. We all know it's very tough. Energy prices, and at the end of the day, what we're producing, it's a commodity. It's energy, it's going onto a grid. It's exactly the same thing. The forecast for energy prices, I think we all know, they're not forecasted to come down. They're forecasted to remain to keep going up over this duration as we work through this energy transition over the next period of time. Importantly as well, the news flow we've got coming out now, there are going to be all major catalysts on the way through. So the big one obviously is going to be financing that we're going to have announced. Hopefully we'll have an update in that early in the second quarter, and then we're targeting FRD shortly thereafterwards. There's one other aspect I probably should have mentioned up front as well. We've obviously how unique our project is and working through in the energy transition. We've been approached a number of times over the last 12 months by a number of large multinational organisations which basically want to have a look at our project. A lot of these companies that they've mentioned to us, they would be interested in potentially having a partnership. In essence, the company, we've appointed Barrenjoey to run a strategic process for us now as well. That strategic process, we'll see how that works through. So the company would be open to selling down a portion of the project at the project level, and that would be for a cash amount. the project partner or the strategic partner then coming in as well, they would help co-fund there afterwards as well. Why are we doing this? Well, first off, it would obviously reduce or minimise our equity contribution in stage one.
Yep.
But I also believe if we get the right strategic partner in, we're really going to accelerate the development of this project. The project is in essence ready to go for a much larger expansion project to make this of really significance across the country. So that's the key reason why we're doing that as well. Again, that process, we'd expect to have results from that during the first half of this year. So there's a lot of big, strong news catalysts coming through. At the same time, when you look at the market overall, I think you're going to keep on getting updates from energy as well as the way the federal and state governments are trying to help this transition along the way.
Boy, ladies and gentlemen, I think he knows a little bit about the energy market and specifically renewable energies. Adam, that was a really good deep dive into what you're doing at Frontier Energy. Come back and chat to us again as you get the news flow, because I think this is the first time we've chatted. 304 million, I think, is the funding that you need. That's not a huge number. It's doable. And as you say, potentially looking for partners as well. I really appreciate your time on Making Money today. Thanks so much for chatting to us.
Thanks very much for having us, Gary.